The maintenance clipboard felt heavier in Captain Riley Parker's hands than the flight controls of an F-22 ever had. At 5:47 a.m., Thunderbolt Air Base hummed with the familiar rhythm of another day jet screaming overhead, ground crews shouting instructions, and the metallic symphony of military precision. But Riley moved through it all like a shadow, invisible to the pilots who rushed past her toward their briefings. 2 years ago, she had been one of them. 2 years ago, her name had been whispered with respect in fighter pilot circles across 3 continents. Now, at 34, she was officially nobody, a maintenance technician with security clearance, barely high enough to inspect the aircraft she once commanded better than anyone else in the Air Force, the morning inspection of the experimental Phoenix 7 stealth fighter should have been routine. Riley ran her hands over the aircraft's composite skin, checking for stress fractures with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through countless test flights. Her fingers found every rivet, every panel seam, every potential failure. Point with an intimacy that came from understanding these machines at a molecular level. Still playing with toys, Parker? The voice belonged to Major Bradley Hutchinson, the current lead test pilot for the Phoenix program. He stood in his flight suit, helmet tucked under his arm, radiating the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his mistakes. Behind him, Captain Derek Morrison, no relation to the base commander, snickered like a schoolyard bully. Riley didn't look up from her inspection. Just ensuring your aircraft won't fall out of the sky, sir. My aircraft, Hutchinson repeated, letting the possessive hang in the air. Funny how things work out, isn't it? One little mistake, and suddenly the great Riley Parker is checking my tire pressure. The little mistake had cost the military a $200 million prototype and nearly cost Riley her life. A hydraulic system failure during a classified test flight had sent her experimental aircraft into an uncontrolled dive. She'd managed to eject at the last possible second, watching months of cutting-edge engineering explode across the Nevada desert. The investigation had been swift and decisive. Despite clear evidence of mechanical failure, Riley had provided an excruciating technical detail. Someone needed to be held responsible. The program was too important, the stakes too high, and the political pressure too intense for the truth to matter more than convenience. Riley Parker, once trusted with aircraft that officially didn't exist, was stripped of her flight status and reassigned to ground support duties pending review. The review, she'd been assured, was just a formality. That was 24 months ago. Is there something specific you need, Major? Riley asked, finally meeting Hutchinson's eyes. Actually, yeah. Make sure you triple-check the navigation systems. I'd hate for any irregularities to show up during today's test. His smile was razor-thin. You understand how important accuracy is in maintenance reports. The threat was clear. Riley's maintenance records were scrutinized with an intensity that bordered on harassment. One questionable judgment call, one missed detail, one minor oversight would give them the excuse they needed to remove her from the base entirely. She nodded once, professionally, and watched Hutchinson swagger away. As the morning progressed, Riley completed her inspections with robotic efficiency. She knew these aircraft better than their designers. She'd helped develop half the systems currently in testing. Her technical knowledge was encyclopedic, her attention to detail flawless, but none of that mattered anymore. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the maintenance office, reviewing technical manuals for aircraft she'd never fly again. The solitude was broken by Tech Sergeant Marcus Williams, a 20-year veteran who'd been at Thunderbolt since before Riley's arrival. You know, Williams said, settling into the chair across from her, I've been watching you work for 2 years. Now, never seen maintenance inspections so thorough they could qualify for engineering dissertations. Riley looked up from her manual. Williams was one of the few people on base who still treated her like a human being rather than a cautionary tale. Just trying to do the job right, Sergeant. The job you're doing could be handled by a second-year tech school graduate, Williams said quietly. Oh, my nephew could do equipment inspections. But what you're doing, the kind of analysis you put in those reports, that's test pilot level insight. Used to be, Riley corrected. Is, Williams said firmly. You think those fancy boys understand half of what you catch in your maintenance notes? Hutchinson couldn't tell a stressed wing spar from a coffee stirrer, but he's up there flying birds that you know better than he knows his own reflection. Riley closed the manual and leaned back in her chair. Doesn't matter what I know, Marcus. What matters is what the file says. Files can change, not mine. Williams was quiet for a moment, studying her with the expression of someone who'd seen too many good people broken by institutional politics. You ever wonder why they keep you here? Why they don't just transfer you to some desk job in Colorado Springs? Riley had wondered. A maintenance position at Thunderbolt was hardly punishment duty. This was where the Air Force tested its most advanced aircraft. Someone with her background could have been shipped off to routine logistics work anywhere in the world. Maybe they're hoping I'll get frustrated and resign, she said. Or maybe, Williams said, standing to leave, maybe they know something they're not ready to admit yet. That afternoon, Riley watched through the hangar windows as Hutchinson took the Phoenix 7 through its paces. The aircraft was beautiful in flight, all sharp angles and impossible curves. Moving through the sky like physics was just a polite suggestion. She knew every system on that plane, had helped design half the testing protocols Hutchinson was executing. But she also knew something else, something that gnawed at her as she watched the sleek fighter slice through the afternoon sky. The Phoenix program was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble that showed up in official reports, but the subtle, persistent problems that experienced test pilots felt in their bones. 3 minor incidents in the past month. Navigation glitches that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Engine performance variations that fell within acceptable parameters, but followed no logical pattern. Nothing dramatic enough to ground the program, but concerning enough to keep Riley awake at night. She'd mentioned her concerns in her maintenance reports, couched in careful technical language that couldn't be dismissed as pilot ego or frustrated ambition. But her insights were filtered through a chain of command that had already decided she was unsuitable for operational input. As the Phoenix 7 touched down and taxied toward the hangar, Riley gathered her tools and prepared for the post-flight inspection. Tomorrow would bring another day of routine maintenance, another day of watching other people fly the aircraft she understood better than anyone else on the base. But tonight, as she locked up the maintenance office and walked across the darkening tarmac, Riley Parker carried a secret that would soon change everything at Thunderbolt Air Base. She'd been analyzing the Phoenix program's performance data for months, and she'd identified a pattern that no one else had noticed. The aircraft wasn't just having minor technical issues. It was building toward a catastrophic system failure that would kill whoever was flying it when the pattern reached its inevitable conclusion. And according to her calculations, that moment was less than a week away. The emergency klaxon shattered. The pre-dawn silence at Thunderbolt Air Base, its wailing cry cutting through Riley Parker's uneasy sleep like a blade. She was dressed and running toward the maintenance hangar before her conscious mind fully processed what the alarm meant. Aircraft down, pilot status unknown, emergency response protocol in effect. The scene that greeted her was controlled chaos. Emergency vehicles surrounded the twisted remains of what had been a Phoenix 7 stealth fighter 12 hours earlier. The aircraft had crashed during a routine night training exercise, punching a crater into the desert floor 3 miles from the runway. Major Bradley Hutchinson had ejected successfully, but barely his parachute had deployed less than 500 feet from impact. Riley stood at the edge of the crash site, watching investigators photograph debris while her mind cataloged every twisted piece of metal. The wreckage told a story that made her stomach clench with a mixture of vindication and horror. This wasn't pilot error or random mechanical failure. This was exactly what she'd been predicting in her maintenance reports for the past 3 months. Barker, Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, and Derek's father strode toward her with the expression of a man looking for someone to blame. You were the last person to inspect that aircraft. I want your report on my desk in 1 hour. Yes, sir, Riley replied, but her attention remained fixed on a particular piece of debris section of the navigation computer, housing that showed clear signs of the cascading electrical failure she'd been documenting. The next few hours passed in a blur of interviews, technical reports, and the kind of institutional finger-pointing that followed any aircraft loss. Riley provided her assessment with clinical precision, detailing every system check she'd performed and every anomaly she'd noted in her maintenance logs. What she didn't mention was the analysis she'd been conducting in her own time, using maintenance data to build a comprehensive picture of the Phoenix program's systemic problems. That information lived in encrypted files on her personal laptop, evidence of insights that officially she wasn't qualified to provide. By noon, the preliminary investigation findings were circulating through the base's officer community. Pilot error was the early frontrunner for official cause. Hutchinson had been pushing the aircraft through aggressive maneuvers that exceeded recommended parameters. The crash was being framed as the inevitable result of reckless flying, rather than fundamental design flaws. Riley was reviewing inventory reports in the maintenance office when Tech Sergeant Williams appeared in her doorway, his expression grim. "Conference room B, 10 minutes, he said quietly. "Bring everything." "Everything?" "Your laptop, your personal files, anything related to Phoenix performance analysis." Williams glanced over his shoulder, then stepped closer. "There are people who need to see what you've been working on." Riley's pulse quickened. Her unofficial analysis was thorough enough to constitute insubordination if discovered by the wrong people. But if Williams was right, if someone was finally ready to listen to her technical concerns rather than dismiss them based on her personnel file, this might be her chance to prevent more crashes. Conference Room B was normally used for routine briefings, but today it held an unusual assembly. Colonel Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 civilians Riley didn't recognize investigators from the Pentagon based on their bearing and expensive suits. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the Phoenix program's chief engineer, occupied a chair along the wall, her laptop open and files spread across the table. "Captain Parker," Colonel Morrison began formally, "these gentlemen are investigating systemic issues with the Phoenix program. They've requested access to all maintenance data from the past 6 months, including any personal observations or analysis you may have conducted." Riley set her laptop on the table, acutely aware that the next few minutes would either vindicate 2 years of careful observation or end her military career entirely. "Sir, I've been tracking performance anomalies across multiple aircraft for several months. The patterns suggest." "We'll determine what the patterns suggest," interrupted one of the civilians, a thin man with steel-gray hair and the demeanor of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "What we need from you is raw data, not interpretation." For the next hour, Riley walked them through her analysis. Navigation system irregularities that appeared random but followed a predictable sequence when viewed across multiple flights. Engine performance variations that suggested software conflicts between primary and backup control systems. Electrical anomalies that occurred precisely when aircraft reached specific combinations of altitude, speed, and system load. This level of analysis, Rodriguez said finally, goes far beyond standard maintenance protocols. Where did you acquire the expertise to conduct this kind of systems integration review? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Riley was officially a maintenance technician with basic technical training. The analysis she'd presented required advanced engineering knowledge and test pilot experience that her current position didn't acknowledge. I observe patterns, ma'am. When you work with the same aircraft daily for 2 years, you notice things. The gray-haired civilian leaned forward. Captain Parker, your maintenance reports show exceptional attention to detail, but this analysis suggests knowledge of flight systems at a level typically associated with test pilot training. Help us understand how a maintenance technician developed this expertise. Riley felt the familiar weight of institutional suspicion settling over the room. These people needed her knowledge, but they couldn't reconcile her insights with their preconceptions about her current role. The truth that she understood these aircraft better than anyone else on the base, because she'd helped develop them, was too politically inconvenient to acknowledge. I study technical manuals in my spare time, sir. I ask questions. I pay attention. Colonel Morrison's expression suggested he found this explanation as unsatisfying as the investigators did. But before he could respond, Williams knocked on the conference room door. Sir, we have another situation. Lieutenant Blake's Phoenix just experienced a complete navigation failure during final approach. He managed an emergency landing, but the system crashed exactly as Captain Parker predicted in her analysis. The room fell silent. Riley's projection models had indicated that the next critical failure would occur within 72 hours of Hutchinson's crash, affecting whichever Phoenix aircraft accumulated the specific combination of flight hours and system stress she'd identified as the trigger point. Lieutenant Blake's aircraft had fit that profile perfectly. Captain Parker, the gray-haired civilian said slowly, we need to discuss your analysis in much greater detail. And we need to discuss it now. Riley opened her laptop and began explaining how she'd identified the pattern that was systematically destroying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the American military. What she didn't explain was how she knew these systems so intimately, or why her technical knowledge exceeded what her current position should have provided. But as the afternoon wore on, and as her predictions proved accurate with disturbing precision, Riley began to understand that her exile might be ending. The Phoenix program was in crisis, and she was the only person who understood why. The question was whether institutional pride would allow them to admit they needed her expertise, or whether they'd find another way to explain away the knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Outside the conference room windows, another Phoenix 7 sat on the tarmac, its sleek lines hiding the fatal flaw that Riley had identified months ago. Tomorrow, that aircraft was scheduled for Major Derek Morrison's certification flight, the test that would qualify him as a Phoenix program instructor pilot. Based on her analysis, that flight would be Lieutenant Blake's aircraft twin in terms of accumulated stress factors. Without immediate intervention, Derek Morrison would be flying a time bomb that was scheduled to explode somewhere over the Nevada desert. Riley closed her laptop and looked directly at Colonel Morrison. Sir, I need to show you something else. Something about tomorrow's flight schedule. The pre-dawn briefing room at Thunderbolt Air Base felt like a tribunal. Riley Parker sat across from a panel of investigators, engineers, and military officials who'd spent the past 18 hours dissecting every aspect of her Phoenix program analysis. Her laptop remained open between them, displaying technical data that had already prevented one potential disaster and might prevent another. Colonel Morrison looked like he hadn't slept. His son Derek was scheduled to fly in 6 hours, a certification flight that Riley's models indicated would end in catastrophic system failure unless the aircraft underwent immediate inspection and repair. Captain Parker, said Dr. Angela Foster, the lead investigator from Pentagon's Aircraft Safety Division. Your analysis correctly predicted Lieutenant Blake's navigation failure down to the approximate time and system sequence. That level of accuracy suggests either remarkable analytical skill or direct knowledge of ongoing technical issues. Riley chose her words carefully. Ma'am, I've had extensive time to study these aircraft. Pattern recognition becomes clearer when you have comprehensive data sets. Pattern recognition, Major Derek Morrison said from his position near the wall, or inside information about deliberate sabotage. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. Riley turned to face Derek directly, noting the fear behind his arrogance. Tomorrow's flight would be his first solo Phoenix mission, and her analysis had identified his aircraft as the next likely failure. Major, are you suggesting I'm sabotaging aircraft that I inspect daily? Aircraft that could kill pilots I've worked with for years? I'm suggesting, Derek replied, that someone with your history might have reasons to want the Phoenix program to fail. Colonel Morrison raised his hand before Riley could respond. Major Morrison, you're out of line. Captain Parker's analysis has been independently verified by 3 separate engineering teams. Her predictions are mathematically sound. Dr. Foster consulted her tablet. Captain, we need to understand the source of your technical expertise. Your current position involves equipment inspection, not systems analysis. Yet you've identified failure patterns that escape detection by certified Phoenix engineers. Riley felt the familiar weight of institutional skepticism settling over her shoulders. These people needed her knowledge but couldn't reconcile her insights with their assumptions about her capabilities. The truth that she'd been one of the Phoenix program's original test pilots was buried in classified files that wouldn't be opened to clear her name. I read technical manuals, ma'am. I ask questions. I'd pay attention to details that others might overlook. You've also, Dr. Foster continued, identified a specific aircraft as high risk for tomorrow's flight schedule. Major Derek Morrison's. Phoenix shows the same stress pattern indicators that preceded both recent failures. Derek stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. You're grounding me based on the word of a maintenance tech who was kicked out of the pilot program for incompetence? I was reassigned due to aircraft failure, Riley corrected quietly. The same kind of systemic failure I'm trying to prevent tomorrow. The same kind of failure you caused, Derek shot back. Everyone knows what happened during your test flight. You panicked, made bad decisions, and destroyed a $200 million prototype. Riley stood slowly, her composure finally cracking after 2 years of similar accusations. Major, I didn't panic. I identified a hydraulic system failure, attempted emergency procedures, and ejected when the aircraft became uncontrollable. The investigation findings said pilot error was a contributing factor. Derek interrupted. The investigation findings, Colonel Morrison said sharply, are classified and not subject to discussion in this forum. He looked directly at his son. Major Morrison, you're dismissed. Report to the flight line at 0800 for pre-flight briefing. Derek hesitated, clearly wanting to continue the argument, but military discipline overrode personal animosity. He saluted stiffly and left the briefing room, but not before shooting Riley a look that promised this. Confrontation was far from over. Dr. Foster waited until the door closed before speaking again. Captain Parker, we're implementing your recommendations. Major Morrison's aircraft will undergo comprehensive inspection before any flight operations. But we need more than technical analysis. We need to understand how you developed this level of systems knowledge. Riley looked around the room at faces that mixed professional respect with personal suspicion. These people valued her insights but questioned her authority to provide them. They needed her expertise but couldn't acknowledge the experience that made it possible. Dr. Foster, I've been studying these aircraft for 2 years. When you're responsible for ensuring pilot safety through maintenance inspection, you develop a comprehensive understanding of system integration and failure modes. Or, said Captain Rodriguez, the Phoenix program engineer, you already possessed that understanding before your reassignment to maintenance duties. The statement was carefully neutral, but Riley heard the question behind it. Rodriguez had been reviewing personnel files, trying to understand how a maintenance technician had developed test pilot-level technical knowledge. Captain Rodriguez, are you suggesting my background includes experience beyond my current assignment? I'm suggesting that your analysis demonstrates expertise typically associated with advanced flight training and systems development work. Riley felt the conversation approaching dangerous territory. Acknowledging her previous role would require opening classified files and admitting that the investigation that ended her career had been politically motivated rather than technically justified. My expertise comes from careful observation and systematic analysis, she said finally. Dr. Foster consulted her notes. Captain, we're recommending that you be assigned as technical consultant to the Phoenix investigation team. Your insights have already prevented potential casualties. Ma'am, I'm not qualified for consultant positions. I'm maintenance personnel. You're qualified by results, Dr. Foster replied. Your analysis is saving lives. Colonel Morrison leaned forward. Captain Parker, I'm authorizing temporary assignment modification. You'll work directly with the investigation team while maintaining your regular duties. Riley nodded, understanding that she was being offered a chance to use her knowledge, without officially acknowledging where that knowledge came from. It was a compromise that protected everyone's career while potentially solving the Phoenix program's problems. Sir, I'll need access to complete flight data and maintenance records for all Phoenix aircraft. Granted. And I'll need authorization to recommend flight restrictions based on aircraft-specific risk assessment. Colonel Morrison hesitated. Giving a maintenance technician authority to ground-certified pilots would raise questions throughout the command structure. Within reason, he said finally. As the briefing concluded, Riley gathered her files with the satisfaction of someone whose warnings had finally been heard. But satisfaction was tempered by awareness that Derek Morrison still considered her an enemy rather than an ally. Tomorrow's flight inspection would either vindicate her analysis or provide him with ammunition to challenge her credibility. Tech Sergeant Williams was waiting in the corridor when she left the briefing room. How'd it go? He asked. There. Listening, Riley replied. Finally. And Morrison's kid? Riley considered the question. Derek Morrison was skilled, ambitious, and convinced that she represented a threat to his career advancement. His aircraft showed clear indicators of impending system failure, but grounding him would confirm his suspicion that she was deliberately undermining Phoenix operations. He's not happy, she said finally. Son, happiness isn't the objective. Here, Williams replied. Keeping pilots alive is the objective. You just remember that when the politics get complicated. Riley nodded, but as she walked toward the maintenance hangar, she wondered if preventing technical failures would be easier than managing the human conflicts her success was creating. Derek Morrison wasn't just another pilot, he was the base commander's son, and his career advancement depended on completing tomorrow's certification flight. The aircraft she'd flagged for comprehensive inspection was parked in Hangar 3. Its sleek profile hiding the electronic time bomb she'd identified through months of careful analysis. Tomorrow would determine whether institutional politics could override technical reality, or whether her expertise would finally be acknowledged as legitimate. Either way, she intended to make sure no one died, because pride mattered more than facts. At 0600 hours the next morning, Riley Parker stood beside Major Derek Morrison's Phoenix 7 in Hangar 3, surrounded by a team of engineers who were about to to discover whether her analysis could prevent another crash. The aircraft looked perfect, all sharp angles and advanced composites, representing billions of dollars in military technology. But Riley knew better. Dr. Angela Foster approached with a tablet full of test protocols. "Captain Parker, walk us through your specific concerns about this aircraft." Riley moved to the Phoenix's navigation console, her hands finding system access panels with the familiarity of someone who'd helped design them. The primary issue is in the integration between navigation and flight control systems. Under specific stress conditions, the backup systems don't properly synchronize with primary controls. "What kind of stress conditions?" asked Captain Rodriguez. Riley pulled up her analysis on a portable computer. "High altitude, maximum velocity, with specific navigation waypoint sequences. The combination creates a feedback loop that the backup systems interpret as primary system failure." "So, the backup systems shut down the primary systems?" Dr. Foster said. "Worse. They fight each other for control while the pilot believes everything is functioning normally." Senior Master Sergeant Tony Blake, no relation to the pilot who'd crashed, began running the diagnostic sequence Riley had recommended. Within minutes, the aircraft's internal systems were displaying error codes that standard pre-flight checks had missed. "Jesus," Blake muttered, staring at his diagnostic computer. "Captain Parker, how did you know these faults were here?" Riley studied the error display, noting the specific combination of failures she'd predicted. Navigation processor conflicts, backup system synchronization errors, and flight control integration problems, exactly the pattern that had destroyed 2 Phoenix aircraft in the past week. Pattern analysis, Sergeant. When you track performance data across multiple aircraft, failure indicators become predictable. Derek Morrison arrived as the diagnostic tests entered their second hour. He was dressed for flight, helmet under his arm, radiating the confidence of someone whose certification depended on completing today's mission. "What's the status?" he demanded. Dr. Foster consulted her tablet. "Major, we've identified multiple system integration problems with your aircraft." Captain Parker's analysis was accurate. This bird would have failed during your certification flight. Derek's expression shifted from confidence to suspicion. "How convenient." The maintenance tech finds problems that 3 teams of certified engineers missed during pre-flight inspection. "Major Morrison," Riley said quietly, "these aren't maintenance issues. They're design integration problems that only appear under specific operational conditions. Conditions you happen to understand better than Phoenix program engineers?" Riley felt the familiar weight of institutional skepticism, but this time she had data to support her position. "Major, would you like to see the diagnostic results?" Derek approached the test station where Sergeant Blake was documenting system failures. The error log showed exactly what Riley had predicted: navigation conflicts that would have caused complete flight control failure at approximately 25,000 feet. "These could be false readings," Derek said, but his voice carried less conviction. Dr. Foster looked up from her own analysis. "Major, we've confirmed these failures on 2 separate diagnostic systems. Captain Parker's assessment is technically sound." Derek turned to face Riley directly. "You're telling me that you, working alone, identified problems that our entire engineering team missed?" "I'm telling you that pattern analysis over extended time periods reveals failure modes that single aircraft inspections don't catch. Pattern analysis that just happens to ground me on my certification day." The accusation hung in the air until Colonel Morrison entered the hangar, trailed by 2 more Pentagon investigators. His expression suggested he'd been briefed on the diagnostic results. "Status report," he ordered. Dr. Foster stood at attention. "Sir, Captain Parker's analysis was correct. Major Morrison's aircraft shows multiple system failures that would have resulted in flight emergency or crash." Colonel Morrison studied the diagnostic readouts, his face showing the expression of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed. How many other Phoenix aircraft show similar problems? Riley consulted her laptop. Sir, based on flight hours and system stress indicators, approximately 60% of active aircraft require immediate inspection. 60%? Derek's voice cracked slightly. You're recommending we ground the entire Phoenix program. I'm recommending we fix the problems before more pilots get killed, Riley replied. Colonel Morrison was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Grounding the Phoenix program would cost millions of dollars and months of development time, but continued operations with aircraft that showed systematic failure patterns would inevitably result in pilot casualties. Captain Parker, he said finally, I'm assigning you as lead technical consultant for Phoenix Program Safety Review. You'll work with Dr. Foster's team to identify and correct these system integration problems. Derek stepped forward. Sir, with respect, Captain Parker is maintenance personnel. This level of technical responsibility requires qualified engineering staff. Major Morrison, Colonel Morrison replied sharply. Captain Parker's analysis has already prevented at least one crash and possibly saved your life. Her qualifications appear to be adequate for the task. Riley felt a surge of vindication mixed with apprehension. She was being offered the chance to use her expertise legitimately, but accepting the assignment would expose her to even more scrutiny about her technical background. Sir, I'll need access to complete Phoenix development files and original design specifications. Granted. And authority to recommend operational restrictions based on aircraft-specific risk assessment. Colonel Morrison hesitated again. Giving a maintenance technician authority over flight operations would raise questions throughout the command structure, but continued crashes would raise worse questions. Within the scope of safety concerns, yes. Dr. Foster looked up from her tablet. Colonel, we're also recommending that Captain Parker receive temporary upgrade in security clearance. This investigation will require access to classified development data. Approved. Derek Morrison watched this exchange with growing frustration. Sir, I request transfer to another program. If Phoenix is going to be managed by maintenance personnel, I'd prefer assignment elsewhere. Request denied, Major. You're staying with Phoenix, and you're going to work with Captain Parker to identify and solve these problems. Derek's jaw tightened, but military discipline prevented further argument. Yes, sir. As the meeting concluded, Riley gathered her files with the satisfaction of someone whose expertise was finally being acknowledged. But the satisfaction was tempered by awareness that Derek Morrison now considered her a direct threat to his career advancement. Tech Sergeant Williams approached as the hangar cleared. Congratulations, Captain. Looks like you're back in the game. Thanks, Marcus. But the real work starts now. What do you mean? Riley looked at the Phoenix aircraft that surrounded them, sleek, deadly, and systematically flawed in ways that their designers hadn't anticipated. I mean, we have to fix these problems without admitting how I know they exist. Williams nodded. Slowly. The political part. The political part, Riley confirmed. Derek Morrison isn't going to make this easy. Son, Derek Morrison is the least of your problems. Wait until Pentagon budget people find out their $50 billion fighter program needs major redesign work. Riley considered this. Her analysis would eventually require acknowledgement that the Phoenix program had fundamental design flaws that couldn't be fixed with minor modifications. The aircraft would need extensive rework, months of additional testing, and significant budget increases, all based on recommendations from a maintenance technician who officially wasn't qualified to make such assessments. Marcus, she said quietly, I think I'm going to need all the friends I can get. Williams smiled grimly. Captain, you've got more friends than you know. Every pilot on this base owes you their life, whether they admit it or not. As Riley walked toward her temporary office in the investigation building, she carried the Phoenix development files that would finally allow her to prove what she'd suspected for months. The aircraft weren't just experiencing random failures. They were victims of a systematic design flaw that made them inherently unstable under specific operational conditions. Fixing the problem would require acknowledging that she understood these systems better than anyone else on the base, and acknowledging that would inevitably lead to questions about how a maintenance technician had acquired test pilot level expertise. Questions that would force her to relive the investigation that had ended her flying career 2 years ago. This classified Phoenix development files filled Riley Parker's temporary office like evidence in a trial where she was simultaneously the prosecutor, witness, and defendant. For 3 days, she'd been analyzing design specifications, test flight data, and engineering reports that painted a picture of institutional negligence stretching back to the program's inception. Dr. Angela Foster knocked on the office door at 0800 hours, carrying coffee and the expression of someone who'd spent the night reviewing technical data. "Captain Parker, we need to discuss your findings." Riley looked up from a computer screen displaying Phoenix flight control software architecture. The code was elegant and sophisticated, but it contained a fatal flaw that she'd identified within hours of gaining access to the development files. "Dr. Foster, the problem is worse than we initially thought." Foster settled into a chair across from Riley's desk. "Explain." Riley turned her laptop screen so both women could see the software analysis. The Phoenix backup systems were designed to take control during primary system failures. But the trigger conditions for backup activation include normal flight parameters that the software interprets as emergencies. In plain English, the aircraft thinks it's crashing when it's actually flying perfectly. So, it rescues itself by taking control away from the pilot and attempting emergency procedures. Foster studied the screen, her expression growing more concerned as she absorbed the implications. How many flights have experienced this problem? Riley consulted her analysis files. Based on flight data logs, approximately 40% of Phoenix operations have included brief periods of system conflict. Most pilots never noticed because the conflicts resolved quickly. But some didn't resolve quickly. Major Hutchinson's crash, Lieutenant Blake's emergency landing, and at least 3 other incidents that were classified as pilot error or minor technical malfunctions. Foster was quiet for several minutes, processing the scope of the problem. "Captain, this analysis suggests that the Phoenix program has been systematically covering up design flaws for months." "Not covering up," Riley corrected. "Misunderstanding. The engineers didn't recognize the pattern because they were analyzing individual incidents rather than comprehensive flight data." "But you recognize the pattern." Riley felt the conversation approaching dangerous territory again. Her ability to identify the Phoenix's problems stemmed from intimate knowledge of flight systems that her current position shouldn't have provided. "I had access to maintenance data across multiple aircraft," she said carefully. "Pattern recognition becomes clearer with comprehensive data sets." Foster leaned forward. "Captain, we need to discuss your technical background. This level of systems analysis requires expertise that goes beyond maintenance training." Riley's stomach tightened. The question she'd been dreading for 3 days was finally being asked directly by someone who had authority to demand answers. "Ma'am, I studied technical manuals extensively. I ask questions. I pay attention to details. You've also identified software conflicts that Phoenix program engineers missed. You've predicted system failures with mathematical precision, and you've recommended design modifications that require understanding of flight dynamics at a level typically associated with test pilot training." The statement hung between them like an accusation. Foster had been conducting her own investigation, trying to understand how a maintenance technician had developed capabilities that exceeded those of certified engineers. Dr. Foster, are you questioning my analysis or my authority to provide? I'm questioning how you acquired the expertise to conduct this analysis. Riley stood and moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where Phoenix aircraft sat in hangars while engineers worked to implement her safety recommendations. Telling the truth would vindicate her technical knowledge, but force examination of the investigation that had ended her flying career. Ma'am, my expertise comes from extensive study of aircraft systems and careful observation of performance patterns. Captain Parker, Foster said quietly, I've reviewed your personnel file. Riley turned from the window, her pulse quickening. Foster's tone suggested she'd found information that wasn't supposed to be accessible to civilian investigators. Ma'am, your file shows maintenance training and equipment inspection certification, but it also shows gaps periods where your assignment history isn't clearly documented. Riley felt the institutional walls closing around her again. Someone had been digging into classified records, trying to understand the contradiction between her current role and her technical capabilities. Dr. Foster, I'm not sure what you're implying. Foster opened her tablet and displayed a document that made Riley's breath catch. It was a fragment of her original Phoenix program assignment. Single page that had escaped the classification purge that followed her crash. This document suggests you were involved in Phoenix development before your reassignment to maintenance duties. Riley stared at the evidence of her former life. The document was incomplete, missing context and classification markings, but it clearly showed her name associated with test pilot duties that officially had never existed. That document is out of context, she said carefully. Is it? Because this document suggests you were a Phoenix test pilot before your reassignment to maintenance duties, which would explain your extraordinary technical knowledge and your ability to predict system failures. Riley sat down slowly, recognizing that her carefully maintained cover was crumbling. Foster had found enough evidence to piece together the truth, and continued denial would only damage her credibility. Dr. Foster, that information is classified. It was classified, Foster corrected. But the Phoenix program is in crisis, and we need to understand why our best technical analysis is coming from someone who's officially unqualified to provide it. Riley looked at the document fragment on Foster's tablet, seeing her former life reduced to a few lines of administrative text. The irony was bitter. She was being questioned about expertise that had once been celebrated, knowledge that had once made her one of the military's most trusted test pilots. Ma'am, what exactly are you asking me? I'm asking you to explain how a maintenance technician developed test pilot level understanding of Phoenix systems. And I'm asking because your knowledge is the only thing preventing more crashes. Riley weighed her options. Continued denial would protect the classification of her former role, but might undermine the investigation that was saving lives. Acknowledging her background would vindicate her expertise, but force examination of the circumstances that had ended her flying career. Dr. Foster, I was involved in Phoenix development. That involvement ended 2 years ago following an aircraft accident. The accident that resulted in your reassignment to maintenance duties? Yes. Foster consulted her tablet again. Captain, we found references to an investigation that concluded with findings of pilot error. But we've also found technical reports that suggest mechanical failure was the primary cause. Riley felt the familiar weight of institutional betrayal settling over her shoulders. The investigation that had ended her career had been politically motivated, designed to protect the Phoenix program rather than establish truth. The investigation findings are classified, ma'am. Captain Parker, I have Pentagon authorization to review any documentation relevant to Phoenix program safety. That includes previous incident investigations. Riley realized that Foster wasn't just questioning her background, she was conducting a comprehensive review that would inevitably expose the cover-up that had destroyed her career. "Ma'am, what exactly have you found?" Foster turned her tablet so Riley could see the screen. It displayed technical analysis from Riley's original crash investigation analysis that clearly identified hydraulic system failure as the primary cause of the accident. "We found evidence that your accident was caused by mechanical failure, not pilot error. We've also found evidence that this mechanical failure was identical to the Phoenix problems you've been identifying." Riley stared at the documents that proved what she'd known for 2 years, that her crash had been caused by the same design flaws that were now systematically destroying Phoenix aircraft. "Dr. Foster, why are you showing me this?" "Because the Phoenix program has been experiencing the same technical problems that caused your crash. And because the people who investigated your accident either didn't understand the technical evidence or deliberately ignored it." Riley felt 2 years of suppressed anger and frustration rising in her chest. The investigation that had ended. Her career had been a sham, designed to protect institutional interests rather than establish facts. "Ma'am, what does this mean for the Phoenix program?" "It means that you've been right about everything," Foster said quietly. "The technical problems, the design flaws, the systematic failures, all of it traces back to issues that should have been identified during your original investigation." Riley processed this information, understanding that Vindication was finally within reach. But Vindication would come at the cost of exposing institutional negligence that extended far beyond her personal situation. "Dr. Foster, if you're correct, then the Phoenix program has been operating with known safety defects for 2 years. "That's exactly what I'm saying." A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Colonel Morrison entered, followed by Derek Morrison and 2 Pentagon officials Riley didn't recognize. "Captain Parker, Dr. Foster," Colonel Morrison said formally. "We need to discuss the scope of the Phoenix investigation." One of the Pentagon officials, a woman with gray hair and the bearing of senior civilian authority, stepped forward. "Captain Parker, I'm Director Elizabeth Warren from the Defense Safety Oversight Office. We've been reviewing your technical analysis and the circumstances surrounding your reassignment to maintenance duties." Riley stood at attention, recognizing that this conversation would determine her future in the military. "Ma'am, Captain, we found significant discrepancies between the official findings of your accident investigation and the technical evidence that was available at the time." Derek Morrison spoke up from his position near the door. "Ma'am, Captain Parker's accident was thoroughly investigated. The findings were clear." "Major Morrison," Director Warren replied coolly, "the findings were politically convenient. The technical evidence tells a different story." Riley watched Derek's face flush with anger as he realized that his father's investigation was being challenged by Pentagon officials. "Ma'am, are you questioning the integrity of the original investigation?" "I'm stating that the original investigation reached conclusions that weren't supported by technical evidence. And I'm stating that those flawed conclusions have contributed to ongoing safety problems with the Phoenix program." Colonel Morrison stepped forward. "Director Warren, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that Captain Parker's flight status be immediately reinstated, and that she be assigned as lead investigator for comprehensive Phoenix program safety review." Riley felt the room's atmosphere shift as the implications became clear. She was being offered not just vindication, but authority over the program that had destroyed her career. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I'm honored by your confidence." "Captain, this isn't about honor. This is about preventing more crashes by utilizing the expertise that should never have been sidelined." Derek Morrison's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Ma'am, Captain Parker has been out of flight status for 2 years. Reinstating her flight authorization would require extensive retraining and recertification. Director Warren consulted her tablet. Major Morrison, Captain Parker's technical analysis has prevented at least 3 crashes in the past week. Her expertise appears to be current and comprehensive. Riley looked around the room at faces that showed a mixture of vindication, resentment, and political calculation. She was being offered everything she'd wanted for 2 years, but accepting would force acknowledgement that the Phoenix program had been fundamentally flawed from its inception. Director Warren, she said carefully, what would my specific responsibilities include? Complete authority over Phoenix flight operations until all safety issues are resolved. Complete access to classified development data. And complete authority to recommend design modifications or program suspension. Riley understood that she was being offered more than career restoration. She was being given power to fundamentally reshape the program that had broken her. Ma'am, I accept. Within 48 hours of Director Warren's decision, Thunderbolt Airbase transformed from a routine military installation into the center of the largest aircraft safety investigation in decades. Riley Parker found herself in the surreal position of commanding the same hangar where she'd spent 2 years as a maintenance technician, now with authority that exceeded most base commanders. The Phoenix program was officially suspended pending comprehensive safety review. All aircraft were grounded until Riley's team could implement fixes for the design flaws she'd identified. The decision sent shockwaves through the Pentagon, the defense industry, and the careers of everyone who'd been involved in the original development program. Derek Morrison appeared in Riley's office at 1400 hours, his face showing the strain of someone whose career prospects had collapsed overnight. His father, Colonel Morrison, had been reassigned pending investigation into the flawed accident review that had destroyed Riley's career 2 years earlier. You must be satisfied, Derek said, settling into the chair across from Riley's desk without being invited. Riley looked up from technical specifications she was reviewing. Major Morrison, I'm satisfied that we're preventing crashes. I'm not satisfied about anything else. My father's career is over. The Phoenix program is suspended indefinitely. Half the engineering staff has been reassigned. All because of your technical analysis. All because the Phoenix program had fundamental safety problems that weren't addressed when they should have been. Derek leaned forward, his voice tight with anger. You know what I think? I think you've been planning this for 2 years. I think you've been waiting for the chance to destroy everyone who was involved in your investigation. Riley sat down her files and studied Derek's expression. He looked genuinely convinced that she'd orchestrated the Phoenix crisis to achieve personal revenge. Major, do you really believe I sabotaged multiple aircraft and risked pilots' lives just to vindicate my career? I believe you saw an opportunity and took it. Riley stood and moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where Phoenix aircraft sat in enforced idleness while engineers worked to implement safety modifications. Derek, she said, using his first name deliberately, 2 years ago, your father's investigation concluded that I caused a crash due to pilot error. That conclusion was technically inaccurate and professionally devastating. The investigation was thorough and fair. Riley turned from the window. The investigation lasted 12 minutes. The technical evidence was ignored. And the real cause of the crash, the same design flaw that's been killing Phoenix pilots, was buried in classified files. Derek's confidence wavered slightly. That's not how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. And if you'd actually reviewed the technical evidence instead of accepting your father's conclusions, you'd know that. Riley moved to her laptop and pulled up the crash investigation files that Director Warren had declassified. The technical data was comprehensive and damning clear evidence of hydraulic system failure that had been dismissed as irrelevant to the official findings. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward Derek. Hydraulic pressure logs, system performance data, Failure sequence analysis. All evidence that my crash was caused by mechanical failure identical to what we're seeing with Phoenix aircraft. Today, Derek studied the data reluctantly, his expression showing growing uncertainty. The technical evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. "If this is accurate," he said slowly, "then the investigation was ... double quotes. Wrong," Riley completed. "Deliberately or incompetently wrong, but wrong either way." Derek was quiet for several minutes, processing implications that extended beyond his personal situation. If Riley's crash had been caused by design flaws rather than pilot error, then the Phoenix program had been operating with known safety defects for 2 years. "Why didn't you fight the investigation findings?" he asked finally. Riley returned to her chair, remembering the isolation and institutional pressure that had followed her crash. "I tried. I provided technical analysis identical to what you're hired. Looking at now, I requested additional investigation. I documented every system failure that contributed to the crash. What happened? I was told that challenging the investigation findings would be considered insubordination. I was told that accepting the results and maintaining program security was my duty as an officer." Derek absorbed this information, understanding for the first time the institutional forces that had destroyed Riley's career. "So you accepted reassignment to maintenance duties." "I accepted reassignment because the alternative was court-martial for insubordination and breach of classified program security." Derek leaned back in his chair, his anger replaced by something approaching comprehension. "And you've been watching Phoenix operations for 2 years, knowing that the same problems that caused your crash were still present." "I've been documenting pattern failures and trying to prevent crashes through maintenance reports that no one took seriously. Until now, until pilots started dying." Derek was quiet again, processing the scope of institutional failure that had endangered Phoenix operations for 2 years. His father's investigation hadn't just been wrong, it had actively prevented identification of safety problems that were now requiring program suspension. "Riley," he said finally, "what happens now?" Riley consulted her project timeline, noting the months of additional testing and modification work that would be required to make Phoenix aircraft genuinely safe for operations. "Now we fix the problems that should have been addressed 2 years ago. We implement design modifications that will prevent the system failures I've been documenting. And we establish safety protocols that prevent technical evidence from being ignored for political convenience." "How long will that take?" 6 months minimum. Possibly longer if we discover additional problems during comprehensive testing. Derek processed this timeline, understanding that his certification as a Phoenix instructor pilot would be delayed indefinitely. His career advancement, which had depended on completing Phoenix training, was now contingent on Riley's success in resolving the crisis. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Riley looked up from her files. "Major, I've been treating you like an enemy for 2 years. I've been assuming that your technical knowledge was somehow illegitimate, that your insights were motivated by personal grievance rather than professional expertise." "You were protecting your career interests," Riley said. "That's understandable under the circumstances." "No, it isn't. I was protecting my assumptions about what had happened to you. I never actually reviewed the technical evidence. I just accepted the official story because it was convenient." Riley nodded, recognizing the courage it took for Derek to acknowledge his misconceptions. "Derek, you weren't the only person who made assumptions. The entire institutional structure supported those assumptions. But I was the one who questioned your expertise every time you tried to prevent crashes. And now you understand why I had that expertise." Derek stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Riley, is there anything I can do to help with the investigation?" Riley considered the offer, recognizing an opportunity to transform an adversary into an ally. "Actually, yes. I need someone with current Phoenix flight experience to help evaluate the safety modifications we're implementing. You want me to work with you? I want you to help make sure Phoenix aircraft are safe before any pilot flies them again." Derek nodded slowly. "I'd be honored to contribute to that effort." As Derek left her office, Riley returned to the technical specifications that would determine the Phoenix program's future. The investigation was revealing systematic problems that would require months to resolve. But for the first time in 2 years, she had authority to ensure that political convenience wouldn't override technical reality. Tech Sergeant Williams knocked on her door at 1700 hours, carrying coffee and the satisfied expression of someone whose instincts had been vindicated. "Captain," he said, settling into the chair Derek had vacated, "I've been watching this base for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what's happened this week." "What do you mean, Marcus?" "I mean, you've gone from maintenance tech to program director in 4 days. That's either the fastest career advancement in military history or the most dramatic vindication I've ever witnessed." Riley smiled grimly. "Probably both. What's next?" Riley looked at the project timeline that would consume the next 6 months of her life. "Next, we prove that good engineering can overcome bad politics. We fix the Phoenix program properly, and we make sure this kind of institutional failure doesn't happen again." Williams nodded approvingly. "Captain, there's something I've been wanting to tell you for 2 years. What's that?" "I always knew you'd be back in the cockpit eventually. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever." Riley felt a surge of gratitude for the steady support that had sustained her through 2 years of professional exile. "Marcus, I couldn't have survived this without friends like you." "You didn't just survive, Captain. You prevailed. And every pilot on this base is going to fly safer aircraft because of your expertise." As Williams left her office, Riley returned to the technical work that would define the next phase of her career. The Phoenix investigation was more than professional vindication. It was an opportunity to ensure that institutional politics would never again override technical reality when pilots' lives were at stake. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as her team began implementing the design modifications that would make Phoenix aircraft genuinely safe for operations. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Riley Parker was exactly where she belonged, using her expertise to protect the pilots who trusted their lives to the aircraft she understood better than anyone else in the world. 6 months later, Thunderbolt Air Base hummed with the controlled energy of a program reborn. The Phoenix aircraft that emerged from comprehensive redesign bore little resemblance to the flawed fighters that had terrorized pilots for 2 years. Every system had been analyzed, modified, and tested according to safety protocols that Riley Parker had personally developed. Now, standing beside Phoenix 7 Bravo in the pre-dawn darkness, Riley performed the final inspection that would determine whether her technical analysis had successfully eliminated the design flaws that had nearly destroyed the program. Today's test flight would be her own, the first time she'd occupied a cockpit as pilot in command since the crash that had ended her career. Director Warren approached across the tarmac, flanked by Pentagon officials and military brass who'd come to witness either Riley's vindication or the Phoenix program's final failure. The political stakes couldn't be higher. Billions of dollars in development costs, months of scheduled delays, and the careers of everyone involved depended on the next 2 hours. "Captain Parker," Warren said formally, "are you satisfied with the aircraft's condition?" Riley completed her external inspection checklist, noting the modifications that her team had implemented over the past 6 months. New hydraulic systems, redesigned backup controls, and completely rewritten software that eliminated the integration conflicts that had caused multiple crashes. "Ma'am, all systems show green. The aircraft is ready for comprehensive flight testing." "And you're confident in the modifications?" Riley looked at the Phoenix that had been transformed according to her technical specifications. Every change had been tested exhaustively. Every system integration verified through simulation and ground testing that exceeded anything in military aviation history. I'm confident that this aircraft is safer than any fighter currently in service. Colonel Morrison recently reinstated after an investigation that cleared him of deliberate misconduct, approached with Derek Morrison and the flight test team that would monitor today's mission. Captain Parker, the colonel said, I want to personally apologize for the circumstances that led to your reassignment 2 years ago. The investigation was inadequate, and the conclusions were unjustified. Riley accepted the apology with professional courtesy, understanding that institutional healing required acknowledgement of past mistakes. Sir, what matters now is ensuring that Phoenix operations are safe for all pilots. Derek Morrison stepped forward, wearing the flight suit of a certified Phoenix instructor pilot, a KALA qualification he'd earned through the new training program that Riley had developed. Riley, he said, I've reviewed every modification you've implemented. The technical changes are comprehensive and brilliant. But are you sure you want to be the test pilot for today's flight? Riley understood Derek's concern. Despite 6 months of successful ground testing, today's flight would subject the redesigned Phoenix to operational stresses that could reveal unforeseen problems. If something went wrong, the pilot who'd rebuilt the program could become its final casualty. Derek, I know these systems better than anyone else. If there are problems, I'm the person most likely to identify and manage them. And if there aren't problems? Riley smiled, feeling anticipation rather than apprehension about returning to the cockpit. If there aren't problems, then we've proven that good engineering can overcome institutional politics. Dr. Foster approached with her final technical assessment. Captain Parker, we've completed final systems verification. All modifications show optimal performance within design parameters. Any concerns? Only one, Foster replied. The Phoenix now performs so far beyond original specifications that we'll need to completely rewrite training protocols and operational procedures. Riley nodded, understanding that success brought its own complications. The redesigned Phoenix was essentially a new aircraft that happened to share a designation with its flawed predecessor. As the sun rose over the Nevada desert, Riley completed her pre-flight briefing with the confidence of someone whose technical knowledge had been earned through 2 years of systematic analysis and 6 months of comprehensive redesign work. The cockpit of Phoenix 7 Bravo felt familiar yet transformed. The control interfaces were identical to what she remembered, but the underlying systems represented revolutionary improvements in flight safety and performance capability. Control. This is Phoenix 7 Bravo requesting clearance for comprehensive flight test. Phoenix 7 Bravo, you are cleared for takeoff. Execute full test protocol and report status every 2 minutes. Riley advanced the throttles and felt the Phoenix respond with smooth, predictable power that demonstrated the success of her engine management modifications. The aircraft left the runway with the grace of a machine that had been engineered to perfection rather than rushed into service. For the next 90 minutes, Riley subjected the Phoenix to every stress condition that had caused failures in previous aircraft. High-altitude navigation sequences, maximum velocity maneuvers, emergency system activations, and complex flight patterns that had previously triggered the catastrophic conflicts between primary and backup controls. Every system performed flawlessly. The navigation computers maintained perfect integration with flight controls. The backup systems remained properly subordinated to primary controls until genuine emergencies required their activation. The hydraulic system showed no signs of the pressure variations that had caused her original crash. Control. Phoenix 7 Bravo completing final test sequence. All systems nominal. All performance parameters exceeded. Phoenix 7 Bravo. Return for landing. Outstanding work. As Riley brought the Phoenix in for final approach, she felt the satisfaction of someone whose technical expertise had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The aircraft that touched down at Thunderbolt Air Base was proof that institutional failure could be overcome by persistent dedication to technical excellence. The hangar erupted in applause as Riley shut down the engines and opened the cockpit canopy. Director Warren, Colonel Morrison, Derek Morrison, and dozens of engineers, technicians, and pilots who'd contributed to the Phoenix redesign surrounded the aircraft with expressions of relief and triumph. "Captain Parker," Director Warren said, as Riley climbed down from the cockpit, "you've just completed the most successful test flight in Phoenix program history." Riley removed her helmet and looked at the assembled team that had transformed a fundamentally flawed aircraft into a masterpiece of military engineering. "Ma'am, this success belongs to everyone who contributed to the redesign effort. I just had the privilege of proving that their work was successful." Derek Morrison approached with the smile of someone whose misconceptions had been replaced by genuine respect. "Riley, that was flying that exceeded every parameter we established for Phoenix operations. Derek, that was an aircraft performing exactly as it was designed to perform safely, predictably, and within specifications that prioritize pilot survival over institutional convenience." Colonel Morrison joined the group surrounding Riley, his expression showing relief that extended beyond professional satisfaction. "Captain Parker, I'm authorizing immediate reinstatement of full Phoenix operations. The program is no longer suspended." Riley nodded, understanding that her work had achieved more than personal vindication. The Phoenix program would continue with aircraft that were genuinely safe for operational use. Tech Sergeant Williams appeared at her elbow, grinning with the satisfaction of someone whose faith had been rewarded. "Captain, I've got a question." "For you? What's that, Marcus?" "Now that you've rebuilt the Phoenix program and proven that politics can't override good engineering, what are you going to do for an encore?" Riley considered the question, looking around at the base that had been transformed by 6 months of systematic dedication to technical excellence over institutional convenience. "Marcus, I'm going to keep flying. I'm going to keep ensuring that pilot safety takes priority over bureaucratic comfort. And I'm going to make sure that no pilot ever again gets blamed for crashes caused by design flaws that politicians want to ignore." Williams nodded approvingly. "Captain, that sounds like a mission worth dedicating a career to." As the celebration continued around the Phoenix that had proven the success of her technical vision, Riley Parker understood that she'd achieved something more valuable than career restoration. She'd proven that expertise and persistence could overcome institutional failure, that technical truth could prevail over political convenience, and that the best people never really lose their abilities. They just wait for opportunities to prove them again. The Phoenix program that emerged from her investigation would serve as a model for how military development should prioritize safety over schedule, engineering over politics, and pilot welfare over bureaucratic convenience. And Riley Parker would continue flying, ensuring that the sky belonged to those who understood that true excellence could never be permanently hidden by administrative decisions or institutional politics. 1 year after the Phoenix program's resurrection, Riley Parker stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, delivering the keynote address at the annual Flight Safety Symposium. The audience included pilots, engineers, commanders, and safety investigators from across the military aviation community, people who'd come to hear from the officer whose technical analysis had revolutionized approach to aircraft development and institutional accountability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Riley began, 18 months ago, I was a maintenance technician whose insights were dismissed as the frustrated complaints of someone who'd been removed from flight status due to pilot error. Today, the Phoenix program stands as the safest and most successful fighter development effort in military history. The transformation had been remarkable. Phoenix aircraft equipped with Riley's safety modifications had completed over 2,000 flight hours without a single system failure. The redesigned fighters outperformed original specifications while maintaining safety margins that exceeded any previous military aircraft. But the institutional changes had been even more significant. Director Warren, who'd been promoted to Deputy Secretary of Defense for Safety Operations, had implemented Riley's recommendations throughout the Pentagon's acquisition process. No longer could political pressure override technical analysis. No longer could single incidents be used to silence expert voices. No longer could institutional convenience take priority over pilot safety. The lesson of the Phoenix program. Riley continued, isn't that one person's analysis can solve complex technical problems. The lesson is that institutional cultures that suppress expertise in favor of convenience will inevitably produce disasters that expertise could have prevented. In the audience, Derek Morrison, now a certified Phoenix instructor pilot and Riley's deputy in the Advanced Flight Safety Division, took notes that would become part of the training curriculum he was developing. The program that had once seemed designed to end his career had instead provided him with opportunities for advancement that wouldn't have existed under the old system. Colonel Morrison, whose career had been salvaged by the investigation that cleared him of deliberate misconduct, occupied a front-row seat. He'd become one of Riley's strongest advocates, understanding that institutional honesty ultimately served everyone's interests better than political calculation. The Phoenix crisis taught us that technical truth is patient, Riley said. Design flaws don't disappear because investigations ignore them. Safety problems don't resolve themselves because bureaucrats find them inconvenient. Reality has a way of asserting itself, usually at the worst possible moment. Tech Sergeant Williams, who'd been promoted to Senior Master Sergeant and assigned as Riley's senior enlisted advisor, watched from the back of the auditorium with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been vindicated spectacularly. After the presentation, Riley was approached by a young second lieutenant whose earnest expression reminded her of herself 15 years earlier. Captain Parker, the lieutenant said, I'm scheduled to begin Phoenix training next month. I wanted to thank you for making sure the aircraft I'll be flying are safe. Riley studied the young pilot's face, seeing ambition tempered by awareness that aviation safety required constant vigilance rather than institutional complacency. Lieutenant, Phoenix aircraft are safe because we learn to prioritize technical truth over administrative convenience. Your job is to make sure that lesson doesn't get forgotten. Ma'am, how do we ensure that? Riley considered the question, thinking about the cultural changes that had transformed Thunderbolt Air Base and influenced Pentagon policy throughout the defense establishment. You ensure it by remembering that expertise exists at every level of military service. You ensure it by listening to technical concerns regardless of who raises them. And you ensure it by understanding that the most dangerous words in aviation that can't be important because it comes from someone whose opinion doesn't officially matter. The lieutenant nodded seriously. Ma'am, I'll remember that. As the symposium concluded, Riley was approached by Dr. Foster, who'd been appointed director of the newly created Pentagon Office for Technical Integrity, a position created specifically to prevent future situations where technical analysis could be suppressed for political reasons. Riley, Foster said, I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? The Secretary of Defense wants to establish an advanced safety analysis division that would review all major military acquisition programs. You'd have authority to investigate any technical concerns raised by any military personnel, regardless of rank or position. Riley considered the offer, understanding that she was being asked to institutionalize the lessons learned from the Phoenix crisis. What would that involve? Complete independence from chain of command pressure. Direct reporting authority to the secretary level. And mandate to investigate any situation where technical expertise might be suppressed for administrative convenience. Riley looked around the auditorium where military personnel from across the services were discussing the Phoenix program's transformation. The opportunity to prevent similar crises throughout the defense establishment was appealing, but it would mean leaving operational flying for administrative oversight. Dr. Foster, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stay with operational assignments. The best way to ensure safety is to remain connected to the people who actually fly these aircraft. Foster smiled. I thought you might say that. The offer remains open if you change your mind. That evening, Riley returned to Thunderbolt Air Base, where she maintained her office in the same building where she'd once been questioned about her technical qualifications. The irony wasn't lost on her. She now occupied the position of Chief of Flight Safety for the entire Phoenix program, with authority that extended across multiple bases and thousands of personnel. Derek Morrison knocked on her office door at 1900 hours, carrying the flight schedule that had become their evening routine. Riley, tomorrow's schedule includes 6 Phoenix training flights and 2 advanced certification tests. All pilots have completed the new safety protocols you developed. Riley reviewed the schedule, noting the names of pilots who would benefit from aircraft that prioritize their survival over bureaucratic convenience. Any concerns? Only one, Derek replied. The Phoenix performs so much better than original. Specifications that our best pilots are requesting assignment to the program. We're having trouble meeting demand. Riley smiled, remembering when Phoenix assignment had been considered a career risk rather than a career opportunity. Derek, that's the kind of problem I'm happy to solve. As Derek left her office, Riley turned to the technical manuals that covered her desk. Documentation for the next generation of military aircraft that would incorporate Phoenix safety innovations from the beginning of development rather than after preventable crashes. Through her office window, she could see Phoenix aircraft on the flight line, their sleek profiles representing the transformation that occurred when technical expertise was allowed to override institutional politics. Her phone buzzed via text message from Tech Sergeant Williams. Captain, just wanted you to know you've got more friends than you know. Every pilot on this base owes you their life, whether they admit it or not. Riley typed back, Marcus, every pilot on this base is flying safer aircraft because we learn to listen to technical concerns before they become tragedies. The response came immediately. Captain, that sounds like a mission worth dedicating. A career, too. Riley looked around her office, noting the awards and commendations that documented her transformation from disgraced maintenance technician to respected safety expert. But the recognition mattered less than the knowledge that her expertise was being used to protect the pilots, who trusted their lives to the aircraft she understood better than anyone else in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the military aviation community implemented safety protocols that prioritized technical truth over administrative convenience. But tonight, Riley Parker was exactly where she belonged, using her knowledge to ensure that institutional politics would never again override the technical realities that determined whether pilots lived or died. The Phoenix program had taught the military establishment that true expertise could never be permanently suppressed by bureaucratic decisions or institutional convenience. Real capability didn't disappear when it was officially dismissed, and the most valuable people often continued developing their skills even when prevented from using them. Riley Parker had proven that opportunities don't always come when expected, but when they do arrive, maintaining capabilities means everything can change in an instant. Her story would be told throughout the military aviation community as proof that courage and competence could overcome even the most entrenched institutional failure. The sky, she had learned, belonged to those who never stopped believing they could fly and who never stopped working to ensure that others could fly safely. In maintenance hangars and briefing rooms across the Air Force, a small inscription had appeared: "The sky never forgets." The message was unofficial, but it captured a truth that resonated throughout the military aviation community. Riley Parker's legacy wasn't just the Phoenix program's transformation. It was the understanding that excellent people often work quietly around us. Their greatest talents suppressed by bureaucratic decisions, but never truly eliminated. True capability waits patiently for opportunities to resurface. And when those opportunities arrive, expertise can change everything in ways that reshape not just individual careers, but entire institutional cultures. The Phoenix had risen from its own ashes, and so had the pilot who'd always known how to make it fly safely. 5 years later, the inscription in Riley Parker's Pentagon office read simply, "Technical truth is patient." As director of the Advanced Safety Analysis Division, she'd prevented 17 potential aircraft disasters, reformed acquisition protocols across all service branches, and established the principle that expertise must be heard regardless of its source. The young pilots who now flew Phoenix aircraft that had completed over 50,000 flight hours without a single safety incident, learned her story as part of their training. They understood that safety wasn't just about following procedures, but about creating cultures where technical concerns could be raised and addressed before they became tragedies. Riley still flew operational missions twice monthly, maintaining her connection to the cockpit while overseeing safety programs that protected thousands of military aviators. The maintenance technician who'd been dismissed as unqualified had become the most trusted voice in military aviation safety. Her story reminded everyone that true expertise could never be permanently hidden by administrative decisions, and that the most important voices often belonged to people whose authority wasn't officially recognized. The sky indeed never forgot. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.